So you're thinking of setting up a trust. We are talking about setting up a lifetime trust. Well, what does that mean? Well, first of all, that means that you're putting in place a trust agreement and you're putting instructions in that trust agreement about what should happen during your life in regard to the assets in the trust. And then you are naming a trustee. Depending on the type of trust, you may or may not be the trustee or a co-trustee. So that will depend on the type of trust you're setting up. But that is different than a trust in a will. And oftentimes, people have different goals when they put a trust in a will. When you are setting up a lifetime trust, you are trying to put something in place now. That's why it's a lifetime trust. And you want to fund that trust, at least nominally, so that it is something. It does mean something. It actually is a trust in place now. Then you will determine what you are going to place in the trust. In other words, are you going to fund that trust with nearly all of your assets for certain reasons or only particular assets? Or are you going to have more than one trust because you have different goals and those goals require different trusts and also will be funded by different assets? Then, of course, in this trust agreement, after you determine what should happen during your life in regard to the trust assets and who will be managing the trust assets, you will also state what should happen upon your passing. And it's very important that this be looked at as far as what are your goals at that time with who you want to benefit, and very critically, who is going to be in charge. Because at that point, you're not here and you want to make sure that trustee is going to fulfill your goals and wishes according to the trust agreement. Now, to break it down just a little bit, we could have a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. Revocable means that you can revoke the trust at any time without anybody else's agreement to do so. You're in charge. You can revoke it. You can put it in place, you can fund the trust, and later on you can say, I need to or I want to revoke this trust and do that all yourself. You can also put in certain terms about who you would allow to revoke the trust on your behalf, or who can at least follow the terms of the trust in the event that you're unable to do so yourself. Now, an irrevocable trust, we are making sure that we have our goals in place as to why this trust needs to be irrevocable, because that is very important. Usually that will break down into an asset protection goal. And because of that, you would not be the trustee of that kind of trust. Somebody else will be managing the trust on your behalf, even during your life, because of the goal that you have, asset protection. Now, as far as a revocable trust, you can have whatever you want in there, right? Knowing that you're going to be able to revoke the trust at any time. But with an irrevocable trust, you would not have that power to go ahead and just change anything or revoke the trust all on your own. That's not going to be possible. There are other ways that there can be some changes depending upon what those changes may be, that you can put in certain provisions allowing you to have some rights, some powers, but not that unilateral ability to revoke the trust. And there are some ways to have other people named in the trust agreement who can have certain rights as far as making some necessary changes. As well, let's just say it was a worst kind of case scenario where you really did want to revoke the trust, right? It's an irrevocable trust, but somehow you want to essentially close down this trust. Well, that's going to be a matter of looking at who is affected in the trust and having everybody agree to it. And that alone can be difficult. And as well, in the event that you do want to close up that irrevocable trust, then you have to think about those goals that you originally had and how they are obviously then not going to be continuing on. You'll be changing what is possible as far as going into the future. Let's just say in regard to asset protection, like I said, as far as an irrevocable trust. But sometimes it's needed under the circumstances. And even for that reason alone, we start to think about who is ultimately affected by this trust. What are your goals? Because in a worst case scenario type of situation, who would be needed to essentially terminate the trust? Now, in regard to trust agreements in general, we're thinking about who's going to benefit from the assets in the trust. Let's take a home as an example. If you're going to transfer your home into a trust, you're setting up a trust agreement. You're deciding if it's going to be a revocable or irrevocable trust for different reasons. And maybe even over time, those reasons can change and the trust can change. But let's just say that you're transferring your home into a trust. Typically, you're going to say that you have the ability to live in and occupy the home as your principal residence as long as you desire, and you don't have to pay any rent. That's kind of obvious, but we state it in the trust agreement. And we would also state certain terms, such as you would be responsible for maintenance and utilities and homeowners insurance and things like that. But let's just say that you moved out, either you wanted to move, or let's say it was an unfortunate situation where you really had to move. Maybe there was a medical need and things really did change, and all of a sudden you just can't live at home. Well, we would put in place what happens at that point. Who can benefit from the home? Do we put in something in regard to who else has life use and occupancy? Do we put in anything in regard to who can rent the home if they do need to pay rent? And who would be responsible for maintenance, homeowners insurance, utilities, taxes, things like that? So we really focus on what's the goal of the trust. And from there, we focus in further on what assets are going into the trust. And from there, we focus on further what provisions make sense. So it's kind of this funnel approach as far as a trust and what you would be thinking about. First, it's goals. And second, it's what kind of trust then from there. And then we go on from funding the trust, the assets, and what the various trust provisions should look like. So it's a fun time to experiment with your goals and your thoughts and work with your estate planning attorney on this. I have to say, I don't believe it's an all or one approach. I don't believe that if you set up a trust, you have to have every asset in that trust. First of all, every situation is different. But I can tell you that there are some very beneficial reasons to have even a home alone avoid probate. And you can stack goals on top of that. Let's say you're stacking asset protection goals on top of that. I've seen situations where probate would have been a nightmare in regard to just the home for different reasons. Somebody else is living in the home, it's beyond the settlor, or probate would be a very difficult experience. Or we just know that, let's say there's going to be a need to control that asset as soon as possible after the person passes. And so even just thinking about what can be beneficial in regard to a specific asset, and the home is a big one, is so incredible with trust planning. And I also believe that people get better and better at estate planning. So let's say you do one thing in 1 year, you can add to that in another year and so on. So let's just say that you do set up a trust with the goals that you have right now. Think of it like 5 years as far as looking into the future. What can you do that's beneficial now? Think of a 5-year kind of plan. And with that, you can know going into the future, you'll reassess and maybe make some more changes. But again, going back to this idea of this is meant to benefit you and those that you want to benefit. So you look at what's the point? What's the point of the trust? What are the assets in the trust? What can be helpful? And I'll just bring up one experience personally for me. I went through a difficult period in my life, and I wish I actually had a trust, and I actually wish I had a co-trustee helping me make certain decisions. Because during that period, I couldn't really step back and see the forest for the trees, and unfortunately made some decisions that really were not good ones. And I could go into a long story about that. But if I had the ability to see how a trust could have been helpful for me, but it would have been crucial to realize I need a co-trustee, that would have been phenomenal. And so I think this is just common sense more than anything, because you're really just trying to get at what's going to be helpful for a person and what's going on with them and their assets. It's most about that, in my opinion. And then from there, we can get into some of the technical things. But we really all, I think, can benefit from that kind of common sense. Let's break this down into what a person could use and can be helpful given that person, their life, the people in their lives, assets, and so on. So I hope this did help. This is Ruth George with Ruth P. George Law, PLLC, Trust and Estate Attorney. This video, as with any video I do put out, is for educational purposes only. It does not establish an attorney-client relationship, and I hope to see you on another video.